Hi class, and welcome to your next video on cell respiration. We're going to talk about cell energy and how we get that energy and use that energy in this video. We've talked about all the organelles so far, but now we're going to talk about how we can use that energy and what processes our cells go through to get it. Okay, so this is over energy processes, cellular respiration, and photosynthesis. This whole unit will be over these two processes. Now, I will warn you, this is a fairly difficult unit for some students. So you're going to need to spend extra time studying, come in for extra questions, really spend that extra time on this unit. Okay. Photosynthesis and cellular respiration. Energy is necessary for life. We know that. We know that we need energy for everything. But what is energy needed for? We need it to grow, transport, manufacture, move, reproduce. So remember how our characteristics of life say, in order to be alive, you have to grow and reproduce. Well, we see that the energy is needed for that. Transporting, just moving, cell movement, manufacturing, making proteins, making RNA, DNA, duplication, anything along those lines. Energy that supports life on Earth is captured from the sun's rays, reaching Earth through plant, algae, protists, and bacterial cells during photosynthesis. So we're making that energy there. Okay, so the two processes are combined and will provide organisms with energy. Ultimately, all energy comes from the sun. So we start with autotrophs who are going to make the energy from the sun, and then those autotrophs or producers are going to be consumed by other organisms. Photosynthesis and cellular respiration. The energy in sunlight is used in photosynthesis to make glucose from carbon dioxide and water with the release of oxygen. So all that it means is we take carbon dioxide, we take water, and we put out oxygen, and we're going to make a glucose molecule. All it is photosynthesis, straightforward. Other organisms use oxygen and sugar to make ATP and release carbon dioxide and water. So when you do cellular respiration, we breathe in oxygen, we breathe out carbon dioxide, and you release water as well to make your ATP. Okay, so look at this. Stop the video and get this in your notes. This is very, very important. Both of these processes are connected. Like I said, all energy ultimately comes from the sun. So we get that energy in photosynthesis. We make that glucose. The glucose is then going to go into the mitochondria where we can make ATP. So you need that oxygen also that is put off from the photosynthesis. So the glucose and oxygen goes into the mitochondria so we can make ATP. And then it's just a continual circle. We have the products of one are the reactants of the other, and plants perform both because, yes, they make the glucose, but they have to be able to get the ATP. Alright, breathing and cellular respiration is connected, but breathing is not cellular respiration. Keep that in mind. We breathe in O2 needed for cellular respiration and breathe out the byproduct carbon dioxide. So in cellular respiration, we need that oxygen for the mitochondria to make the ATP, and we make carbon dioxide. So think about, we all know that we breathe in that oxygen. That's what we breathe it in for. We breathe out that carbon dioxide, that byproduct that we no longer need. Cellular respiration needs oxygen to help harvest energy from glucose and produce carbon dioxide. So what we're doing is we're just getting the energy from the bonds in glucose and producing carbon dioxide as a byproduct. Breathing in O2 while exhaling rids the body of carbon dioxide produced by the cellular respiration. Okay, cellular respiration is an exergonic process that transfers energy from the bonds and glucose to ATP. So we're putting off energy. It's going down a stair-step process that transfers the energy from the bonds so that we can use it. Because remember, glucose cannot be used, but ATP can. Cellular respiration produces 38 ATP molecules from each glucose molecule. Other foods, organic molecules, can be used as a source of energy as well, and you're also going to produce ATP from those as well. You must use organic molecules though. You cannot use anything else. You can't use water. The bonds there do not have the energy to release into ATP. Okay, so get this down in your notes. You do need to know all of the coefficients, all of the numbers here. So what we have is the equation for cell respiration, but we also have, if we think about it, we have the equation for photosynthesis. So we have C6H12O6, which is glucose, plus 6O2 in cellular respiration. That's what goes in. And then we get out 6 CO2, 6 carbon dioxide, 6 water, 6 H2O, and ATP. Remember, on our last slide, we just said we get 38 ATP. Now, if we look at it in the opposite way, because remember we said the products of one are the reactants of the other. So if we look at it, that energy, so this time we're going to get energy from the sun now. And water and carbon dioxide all come from the environment. And if we're inside a plant cell, we can make the glucose and the oxygen. So these processes are very, very connected. It's all about the electrons. So cellular respiration takes the electrons from glucose and uses them to make ATP in a multi-step pathway. So it's not just one pathway. We're going to have 3 different steps in order to make these ATP. When the carbon-hydrogen bonds of glucose are broken, electrons are transferred to oxygen, and oxygen has a strong attraction for electrons. Remember when we talked about water, we talked about the electronegativity of oxygen and how that created the polarity in the hydrogen bonds. We're going to see the same thing here. They're going to have a high affinity for attraction to the electrons. Only 40% of the energy in glucose produces ATP. 60% is lost as heat. So that we're only using a small percent or a medium percentage of that energy in the glucose, because everything else is lost as heat in the process of making the ATP. Cellular respiration is a controlled breakdown of glucose. We don't just have everything going every which way. We are controlling it, so it's kind of like your car. If you fill up your car, and if the gas tank was used all at once, you'd only go about 30, 40 feet. But with cellular respiration, just like your car, it's controlled. We only use a little bit of those ions at a time to get the most amount we can of energy out of each glucose. So energy is released in small amounts that can be captured and stored in ATP. So we take those small amounts, we capture it, and then we get the most out of it that we can. So cellular respiration equation is helpful to show the changes in the hydrogen atom distribution. So if we look at it, we start with C6H12O6. We end with water. So we know all of those hydrogens are transferring to the water. Glucose loses its hydrogen atoms and is ultimately converted to carbon dioxide. Remember, glucose has 6 carbons. we're converting it to 6 CO2s. At the same time, oxygen gains hydrogen atoms and is converted to CO2. So we're still just making that water and we're making that carbon dioxide. Okay. Something has to carry the electrons along the pathway from glucose to oxygen. This molecule is called NAD+, before it accepts electrons, and NADH after it has the electrons. So, if we look at this though, NAD+ has 2 hydrogen electrons available for it, and it'll carry those 2 electrons. There are other electron carrier molecules available like NAD+. They form a staircase where the electrons pass from one to the next down the staircase. These electron carriers collectively are called the electron transport chain. So we're going to go down the staircase, which is going to help create our ATP, because we're getting that momentum of going down that staircase through the carrier molecules. So if we look here, we have the staircase that I was just talking about. So you look and you start up here, and we start with our electron, or remember, our NADH is what carries our electron. So we're actually going to have the NADH, and the electron, the hydrogen, is going to come off of it. So we have the hydrogen, or the H+. And it's going to just use its momentum going down the staircase. So it's going to go through electron acceptors, but it's going down here. And that momentum gives it your ATP, and finally you're going to form water at the very end. Okay, so the stages of cellular respiration. So we've talked all about respiration. We know the theory of respiration. Now let's get to what actually is cellular respiration. So stage 1, fairly simple. This is where the glucose comes into the cell, and this is glycolysis. It's going to break down the glucose, the 6C, into 2 pyruvates, and it occurs in the cytoplasm. Everything else is going to occur in the mitochondria. Remember, we talked about the mitochondria being the powerhouse of the cell. This is going to be the next step. The citric acid cycle is the breaks down pyruvate into carbon dioxide. So still think that, remember, we have 2 pyruvates coming in. It supplies the 3rd stage with electrons via NADH. So we're making these NADHs here within this process in order to send them over to the 3rd stage, the electron transport chain. We had 1 glucose, which made 2 pyruvates, which means we have 2 times that we can turn the cycle. So each time 1 glucose goes in, we have 2 turns of the cycle, and this also occurs in the mitochondria. Oxidative phosphorylation is part of the electron transport chain. Electrons are shuttled through the electron transport chain. ATP is generated through chemiosmosis. We're going to talk about that in a later video, about what exactly is chemiosmosis. So I don't want you to worry about that so much right now. And it occurs in the inner mitochondrial membrane. Okay, so I want you to have taken great notes, great pictures, because remember, like I said at the beginning of the video, this is a hard unit. We're going to discuss this in class. We're going to go over it. We're going to talk about all of these. So be prepared for class with your notes and questions.